As your little sister, I promise to keep your memory alive. I will speak your name with love and tell your story with honesty. I will honor you by living with strength, kindness, and courage. Even though I can't call you anymore, I hear your voice. I know that love don't end when life does. It lives in every memory.
If there was a life to live, AJ did that. At 21, he did just that. I've come to learn that the length of life doesn't determine the size of its impact.
3 weeks after two cousins were gunned down in a Lamborghini, their families finally got to bury them this past Friday. Their killer is still out there, walking around, with no name attached to him at all. That's where this case actually stands right now. And it's not okay. If you're new here, hit subscribe and tap that bell, because we've been tracking this case closely, and you don't want to miss where it goes next. This is Crime Files. Let's walk through this the way it actually unfolded, because I think when you lay it out start to finish, you start to see this case differently than a lot of people online are treating it. It's the 4th of July holiday weekend. Brianna and A.J., along with a third friend, spend the night moving through several different stops. A mansion party at an Airbnb first, then a nightclub, then, somewhere in there, not one but two separate gas station stops. For locations, for different windows where something could have gone sideways. And at one of those gas stations, something did. A fight broke out. We know that much for certain. Family members have confirmed it, and there's reportedly footage of it. What we still don't know, even now, 3 weeks later, is who that fight was with. Strangers. Someone they knew. Someone connected to whoever ended up behind the wheel of that white sedan. Nobody said, at least not publicly. And that's the first real crack in this case. The first thing that makes you lean forward instead of just watching passively. About an hour after that altercation, the three of them are riding in Brianna's lime green Lamborghini Urus, heading west towards Sunshine Boulevard. It's around 5:33 in the morning, and as they reach the intersection near Southwest 27 Court, a white sedan, possibly a BMW, pulls up right alongside the driver's side. What happens next takes only seconds, but it's the kind of seconds that end up defining an entire case. More than a dozen shots are fired into that Lamborghini. Not one warning shot, not a wild spray in a panic. More than a dozen rounds, striking all three people inside. Photos that circulated afterward show the driver's side door of that Lamborghini riddled with bullet holes, close together, deliberate. If you've seen those images, you know exactly what I mean. That is not the kind of damage that comes from someone firing blindly and speeding off. That's someone who wanted to be absolutely certain. The Lamborghini kept moving maybe a block before it ran through a stop sign and rolled into the front yard of a nearby home. A Ring doorbell camera caught the crash. Nobody inside the house was hurt, but imagine being the person who lives there, asleep in your own bed, and waking up to a car full of gunshot victims sitting in your yard. Neighbors up and down that street heard the gunfire. One woman said her mother thought it was leftover fireworks from the holiday until she realized it wasn't. That's how ordinary it sounded in the moment. And that's what makes it so unsettling in hindsight. A quiet residential street, a holiday weekend. And within seconds, everything changed for two families forever. It's worth sitting with what this did to the people who live on that block too. One resident described a neighborhood as tight-knit, the kind of place where everyone pretty much knows everyone else. Not a corridor anyone expected this kind of violence to reach. That's an important detail, because it means this wasn't confined to some area already associated with crime in people's minds. It happened on an ordinary street, in front of ordinary homes, and the people living there are still processing what it means to have woken up to something like that on a holiday morning. Police arrived fast, alerted by the city's ShotSpotter system almost instantly. When they got there, they found all three victims critically injured. Fire rescue rushed them to the hospital. And this is where the emotional weight of this case really sinks in, because we actually have the sound of what happened next. TMZ later obtained the 911 calls. And if you've heard them, you know they're hard to sit through. A man is heard screaming, "Please help me." please help me, over and over, while a woman cries in the background. Another caller, a nearby resident, is telling the dispatcher there's a fight, there's chaos, begging for an ambulance to hurry. That's the real sound of this case. Not a headline, not a follower count, just people terrified, watching their friends bleed out, begging strangers on a phone line to save them in time. Brianna didn't survive. Her cousin A.J. held on, fighting for 3 days in the hospital before he died too. And that's when this went from a tragic shooting to something that felt almost unbearable. Two people who've been raised like siblings, who graduated high school together, whose entire lives have been wrapped around each other since they were kids, gone within days of one another, from the exact same moment, on the exact same street. A.J. As father spoke out publicly not long after, and he wanted to shut something down immediately. Rumors had already started spreading online, the kind that always seemed to show up after a shooting like this, suggesting his son might have had gang ties, that this was retaliation for something. He said, plainly, I raised those kids. They weren't troublemakers. Think about what that takes, having to defend your son's character in public while you're still learning how to breathe without him in the world. The third victim, still unidentified publicly, survived, but not without permanent damage. He needed his jaw wired shut. 3 people got into that car that night. Only one of them is alive to tell us what actually happened in those final seconds. As far as we know, he hasn't spoken publicly yet. Now let's talk about what police have actually said, because one comment from Miramar's police chief has shaped the entire direction of this case. Chief Delrish Moss said investigators didn't believe the neighborhood itself was ever in danger, that this wasn't some random spray of bullets into a community. He said, whoever did this specifically wanted that car, not the block, not the street. That car. Sit with that for a second, because it changes everything about how you should think about this case. If this was targeted, then somebody made a very deliberate decision earlier that night, and that decision is the actual key to solving this, not the shooting itself. I don't think a car gets matched in speed, pulled up alongside, and fired into more than a dozen times by accident. That takes recognition. Whoever was in that white sedan either knew exactly who was in that Lamborghini, or knew the car itself well enough to identify in the dark at 5:30 in the morning on a residential street. That's not random rage. That's premeditation. And there's another detail that supports that read. ShotSpotter picked up what Chief Moss described as rapid, sustained gunfire, not a single shot fired in a panic, and then a car speeding away. Sustained fire into a moving vehicle takes a level of composure that doesn't usually show up in a spur-of-the-moment reaction. Someone who's genuinely panicking after an argument doesn't typically pull up alongside a target car and hold a steady line of fire for that long. That kind of control usually belongs to someone who walked into that moment already having decided what they were going to do. And that's where the gas station fight becomes so important and also so frustrating, because we don't have confirmation either way. An hour passed between that altercation and the shooting. Now, an hour is a strange gap. If someone gets into a fight and immediately wants revenge, you'd expect that to happen fast, within minutes, while emotions are still boiling over. An hour is enough time to leave, make a call, grab a weapon, get in position, and wait. That actually lines up with this being planned rather than a heat-of-the-moment reaction. But it also means the fight might not be the root cause at all. It could be one link in a longer chain that started earlier that night, or even before that night, something we simply haven't heard about yet. Then there's the getaway car itself, and this is where the investigation runs into its biggest wall. Witnesses and surveillance describe a white sedan, possibly a 4-year-old model BMW, with dark tinted windows. Police broadcast that description in real time, and then it just vanished. No plate, no name, no recovered vehicle, even 3 weeks later. Think about what that actually takes. To disappear that cleanly in a quiet residential area, with police already responded within seconds because of ShotSpotter, means either the driver knew those streets extremely well, or they had this planned out in advance, an exit route already mapped, maybe even help waiting somewhere along the way. That's not the profile of somebody acting purely on impulse. And that brings us back to the one person who might actually know the answer to all of this, the surviving passenger. He was there. He may have seen the driver of that sedan. He may know exactly what that gas station fight was really about, and whether it had anything to do with what happened an hour later. But he needed his jaw wired shut after the shooting, and as far as public reporting shows, investigators have said they plan to sit down with him once he's medically able. 3 weeks in, we don't know if that conversation has fully happened yet, or what, if anything, it revealed. He's carrying an enormous weight right now, having survived something that killed 2 people close to him, while potentially holding the one piece of information that could crack this entire case wide open. Now here's something we haven't covered yet, and it adds a whole new dimension to who Brianna actually was. She wasn't only an influencer chasing views. She was a junior at Florida Atlantic University, studying sociology. She was also working at Holy Cross Hospital. Think about that for a second. A full course load, a job, and a growing platform online, all at the same time. This wasn't somebody living off internet fame with nothing else going on. She was building a real, structured life, the kind most 21-year-olds are still figuring out how to balance, and she was doing it while also raising her profile in music. Featured on a song that had already gone viral as a TikTok sound. She had layers most headlines never mention. It makes you think about how flat these stories can get once they hit the news cycle. A headline says influencer killed, and that becomes a whole identity, as if that's all there was to her. But she was juggling a full class schedule at FAU, a job, a hospital, and a growing online career all at the same time, which is a lot for anyone to carry, let alone a 21-year-old. That kind of drive doesn't usually belong to someone chasing an easy version of success. It belongs to someone who is actually working for something, piece by piece, in multiple directions at once. And that's part of what makes the update we haven't discussed yet so heavy. This past Friday, July 24th, a public viewing was held for both Brianna and A.J. together at Hopewell Missionary Baptist Church in Pompano Beach, the same community where they both grew up. Their families invited the public to attend, asking everyone to keep the atmosphere one of love, dignity, and unity, a celebration of who they were rather than just how they died. 3 weeks of no arrest, no suspect, no answers, and these 2 families still had to plan a funeral. Still had to figure out how to bury 2 kids who'd been raised like one. Think about what those 3 weeks actually looked like for these 2 families. While detectives were pulling surveillance footage and running license plate data, Brianna and A.J, as relatives were picking out caskets, writing obituaries, and figuring out how to explain to younger cousins why 2 people who were just at a cookout with them a few weeks ago were suddenly gone. Grief doesn't pause for an investigation. It doesn't wait for a press release. These families had to move forward with burying 2 people they loved while carrying the added weight of not knowing who did it or why, which is its own particular kind of exhausting grief, one layer with unanswered questions on top of loss. So here's where this case actually sits right now. No arrest, no suspect named, no vehicle recovered, no confirmed motive. What we do have is a police department that's been clear this was intentional, a getaway car that disappeared with real precision, a fight at a gas station that might be the key or might just be one piece of something bigger, and a young woman who was building a full life, in school, at work, online, cut short alongside the cousin she considered her sibling. And now, a funeral that's already happened, while the investigation that's supposed to explain why still hasn't given anyone a single answer. So, let's actually sit with this, because I think this case says something bigger than just what happened on Sunshine Boulevard. Why do we as viewers so often want a clean, simple explanation when some cases genuinely stay open and unresolved for a long time? What does it say about a person that they can plan and carry out something this precise and still walk around freely 3 weeks later, while 2 families bury their kids? And how do you think it feels to grieve someone publicly while the person responsible for taking them hasn't even been named yet? I want to hear what you think. Do you believe that gas station fight is really the reason this happened? Or do you think this goes back further than that, to something we haven't even considered? Drop your theory below. I read every single one. And if this case has stuck with you the way it stuck with me, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, so you're notified the moment there's a real update, and share this with someone who needs to hear Brianna and A.J's story. Their families buried them this week without answers. Somebody out there has those answers. And until they come forward, or until investigators find a way to piece this together on their own, that's exactly where this case will stay, stuck between a fight nobody's fully explained and a car nobody's found. Until next time, This has been Crime Files.